All right, hope you all are doing well. Today we are looking at a code snippet that deals with nodes, the node class. In particular, dealing with linked lists. Well, let's get started. As always, just a reminder that the whole purpose of memory diagrams is to teach you how to read like a computer. So a computer reads top to bottom, it reads left to right. Now reads inside out. When I say inside out, I mean that, like for instance here, in order to print castle, we have to first evaluate castle, which involves calling the stir magic method. Oh, let's get started. In fact, the first thing we encounter is an example of computer reading top to bottom. So we have this from future import annotations. This is a little bit of syntactical sugar, as we like to call it, that allows us to do this right here. When your computer's reading this class, it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. I don't know why you are using the node class as an attribute of the node class, or a node object as the attribute of the node class. I don't even know anything about how this node class operates. From future import annotations essentially is us telling the computer, hey, I know something funky is going on, but I promise you it'll all work out in the end. And so it allows our computer to say, okay, cool, let's move on down. In a nutshell. Cool. So let's get started. We encounter this class. We're going to save it for later. So over here in globals, we're going to say node. And over here in heat, we're going to give it an ID. It is a class defined from the first line down to the very last indented line underneath. So 6 through 20. My eraser. All right. And then pie back into the stack so we can find it later. And we skip right on down. Line 22, creating a night object. Well, creating a variable called night, and inside of it we're storing a node object. We know that we are calling the constructor because the name of this function, and we know it's a function because of the parentheses, but the name of the function is the exact same name as the name of its type. This lets us know that we are indeed calling the constructor for the node class, and in fact, when we call a constructor, we're actually calling the init method. Let's go ahead and build that init method. I should leave myself a little room. Making 4 of these suckers. All right. Cool. Making a node method frame. So we start with the class and then the hashtag, and then we're calling the init method. Return address is where the constructor was called, so line 22. And then let's build out these parameters. We've got self, val, and next. Self, val, next. Val is an integer, and next is a node or none. For this right here means or, so a next attribute could either be node or it could be none. What do we have? We have 3 for our val, and we have none for our next. What about self? Self is, we use this blueprint in order to determine how to build it. Over here in the heap, we're going to do ID1. Here's a node. Has 2 attributes. Value attribute, and a next attribute. Cannot fill these in yet because we have not read any lines of code as a computer yet that allow us to put anything in there. However, we can tie it back to the stack. Now we can execute some lines of code and add some attribute values. So self.value, self takes us here to this object. Value is how we access the attribute of this object. So dot value brings us here, and in particular, this slot right here. And what are we doing? We're setting it to value stored in val. Well, the value stored in val is 3. That's what goes there. Same with self.next. Self.next, again, brings us to this object, in particular the next slot. We're setting it to be whatever stored in next. Well, next is none. Over here is none. Cool. Remember, the init method is unique in that it does not specify a return value. There is no return statement there. However, it does return something. In particular, it returns the value stored in self. This makes sense, right? As soon as we leave this frame, we're back in globals, and we have no way of accessing this. If we don't return self, right, our tie to this object in the heap, then when this falls out of scope, we have no access to this value in the heap. So return ID1 back to line 22, and store it with night. Cool. Next, line 23. Line 23 is building another node. But instead of none as our next, we now have night. We're starting to build our linked list. So let's get started. First, we have to build a little slot in globals to store our new node, which is a bishop. I'm seeing a chess theme here. And then we go ahead and build our init method for this node. Return address is line 23. Value, we don't have one yet. Just like last time, got to build out our parameters. So self, val, next. Well, self, we got to build this blueprint. So let's go over here. Build this node object. And it's got 2 attributes. Val, or value in next. So value, next. There we go, a little easier to read. And then we tie it back to our stack. And then finally, what's next? Well, val is passed in as 2. That's easy. And then night is passed in for the next attribute, or the next argument. Well, we're in globals for this function call. So we're in globals because we're furthest to the left here, right? And what is night in globals? Well, night is ID1. So the argument for next is going to be ID1. Great. Now we can go ahead and add these values to our attribute slots. So self.value, self, brings us over here. Value brings us to this slot. What are we doing? We are adding the value stored in val, so 2. Same with self.next. Self.next is set to next. Well, self.next is this slot right here. And we're setting it to the value stored in next, which is ID1. So as of now, we have a linked list pointing to a node pointing to none. Cool. I'm going to return our self. So ID2 goes back to line 23 and gets assigned to bishop. All right. Speed through this next one because rook is an identical procedure as bishop. So up in globals, our rook creating a node object. So we gotta call this init method. Got a return address of line 24. Return value we don't have yet. And let's build out arguments. Val is 1. Bishop is whatever it was in globals, which is ID2. So next is ID2. And we build our self node object. So next available ID is ID3. And our values, or our attribute names are value. And next. Great. Almost done. Just gotta assign them. Self.value is set to val. Oops. Forgot to tie our node back to stack. Now we do. Self.value is set to val. So 1. And self.next is set to next. So ID2. And then we return self. ID3 goes back and is stored with rook. Great. How are we feeling? Ready for the next part? Line 25 asks us to print rook. Why couldn't it have asked us to print castle? Or not castle, knight. That would have been a lot easier. But instead, we've been asked to print rook. Well, rook as it stands is just an ID, right? Without the stir magic method, we would be printing ID3. In fact, we'd be printing a long hexadecimal number, which is the actual location in your computer's memory. But we don't, or we do have a stir magic method, so we are able to call print, which calls stir on a node object. So let's get started. For call and stir node, we start with the name of the method. What's our return address? Well, it's line 25. And return value, we don't have that yet. It just has one argument, which is self. And self is going to be value stored at rook in globals. Well, rook is ID3. So self is ID3. Great. Now moving on. What do we got here? Well, we have rest is a stir. So over here, we're going to put rest. Just leave it blank right now. Whatever's going to be in there will be a string. But as of now, we're just leaving it blank. If self.next is none. Well, self.next is not none. Self.next is ID2. So we can skip that and move on to our else. What are we doing? Well, we're calling stir on self.next and assigning that to rest. So whatever value goes in here is going to be whatever we get back when we call stir on self.next, or ID2. Now, unfortunately, it does mean we have to call stir again, right? We have to call it on self.next, or ID2. ID2 is a node So we get call stir again. Hooray! Line 19 is our return address. Return value we don't have yet. Self is now 82. Well, this is recursion. So I'm just going to double back real quick and go nice and slow. We are trying to get a value to assign to rest. Right now, rest is empty within this frame. In order to do that, we called the stir function on self.next. Well, self.next is ID2, which is this node object. So we're calling the stir method on this node object. Cool. Well, let's get started. Again, within this frame now, we're creating rest. And we're leaving it blank. And then we ask ourselves, is self.next none? Well, self is ID2. Is self.next next attribute none? No, it is ID1. So we get to skip this if block, and instead we are assigning a value to rest. Rest is currently blank. What are we assigning? Well, we're assigning whatever we get back when we call stir on self.next. Well, self.next is ID1, so we're calling the stir magic method on ID1. Well, let's go ahead and do that. I'll bring this down here. It's easier for us to read. And then I'm going to do that. Oops. Do that for these two. Well, oh no, we're going to run out of room. All right. So we're calling stir on ID1 now. So node stir return address. Well, again, it was line 19. One value we don't have yet. But self is now ID1. First thing we do, create a rest variable and leave it empty. Next thing we do, if self.next is none, well, self brings it up here. Dun, 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 dun. Self.next is none. We have reached our base case because, well, we'll see in a sec. First thing we do is we set rest to none. Notice string none, not actually none. Skip our else block. And what are we doing? Well, we are returning the string self.value, arrow, rest. Well, self.value is 3. So we're returning the string 3, arrow, and then the value stored at rest is none. Great. We have a return value. We've reached our base case because we're not returning a recursive call. So we take this string, bring it back to line 19 inside of this frame. What are we doing in this frame? Well, we were assigning a value to rest. So this return value goes into rest. 3, arrow, none. And then we are ready to move and continue with our stir magic method for this frame. We were on line 19, now we get to go to line 20. Well, what are we doing? We're returning another string, self.value. Well, in this frame, self.value is ID 2. Your self is ID 2, so the value, self.value, is 2. So we're returning 2, arrow, and then whatever stored in rest. Well, 3 arrow none is stored in rest, so we write 3 arrow none. So our whole return value is 2, 3, none. Our return value, ready to bring it back to our return address. So that was a line 19 in this frame. So now we're on the line 19 in this frame. What we're doing? Well, we're assigning a value to rest. So this whole function call, it's replaced by its return value. So rest is 2, 3, none. Great. With line 19, line 20 returns self.value arrow rest. Well, self takes us here, which takes us to this value for self.value. So 1, and then concatenating onto it, 2, 3, none is our return value. Okay. I'm going to pause this for a sec and rearrange some stuff. All right. So we have finally gotten our final return value for our print rook function call. So this return value comes back to line 25, and this whole thing gets replaced with this string. 1-2-3-none. So our output is going to be foot going to be 1-2-3-none. Okay. What's next? We've been asked to create yet another node. Call this one Mighty Castle. The castle. But first, we got to create a slot for it in globals. And then we're going to call the init method. Got a return address of line 26. Got a return value we don't have yet. Great. And then finally, self. Now, next. Not going through this quick because we've done this 3 times now. Building out self's value right now. So ID4 is a node value attribute, next attribute. Tie it back to the stack. Then we got 0 and bishop. Value is 0, and then bishop's value is ID2 in globals. So D2. Finally go and add these values to the attribute. So 0 and self.next is now ID2. And then again, we return self for the init method. ID4, it's returned back up here to castle. Cool. Now, what are we asked to do? We've been asked to print castle. Okay, fun. Let's see what this does. Well, we can kind of visualize what's going on here. When we were asked to print rook, right, what was this, which pointed to this, which pointed to this. Okay. Printed this, this, this. Now we're asked to print castle. It's this, this, this. We have almost like a two-headed monster here, right? We have this linked list pointing to none, pointing to here. And then this head points to it, and this head also points to it. We're being asked to print this one. So, hooray! Ready for 3 more square frames? We've been asked to print castle. Node, stir. Return address is line 27. Return value is empty. Self. Well, what's self? Self is the value stored in castle, which is ID 4. Oh, ID 4. Well, I'm going to move through this a little faster because we've already done this 3 times, and we're going to do it 3 more. So we're creating our rest local variable, checking to see if the value stored at self.next is none. If it is, great, we've reached our base case. And if it isn't, we're calling recursively on stir self.next and assigning whatever we get back to rest. Let's go ahead and get started. Rest is going to be empty. We're checking to see if self.next is none. Self.next is not none. So instead, we are going to call stir on self.next. Node hashtag underscore underscore stir underscore return address is going to be line 19. Self is what? Well, self.next, then this frame brings us to ID 2. So ID 2. Again, I'm going to shuffle some stuff around so it's easier to see. Groovy. Cool. All right, let's step into this frame. We have, or into this function, we have creating rest, and we're checking to see if self.next is none. Self is ID 2. .next is not none, it's ID 1. So instead, we jump to the else block, and we're calling stir on self.next. Self.next is a node, so we're calling stir on an object of the node class. Return address is again line 19. Return value is currently empty. Build out our self. Self.next is ID 1. Build our rest. And we're ready to move in. Self.next is none. Self.next is none. Hooray! So we are ready to set rest to none. Get the else block and return the string self.value. Well, self.value is 3, 0, and then the value of rest, which is none. Got a return value. Return it back to a return address, which is line 19 of this frame, where we're assigning a value to store in rest. Return value replaces the function call. So rest is now 3, arrow, none. And then we return self.value, which on this frame, self.value is 2. We're returning 2, arrow, and then whatever stored in rest, which is 3. Oh, that goes back up to this rest. 2, 3, none. Then we're returning self.value, which is 0. And then concatenate to it the value stored at rest. 2, 3, none. Great. Finally, return value goes back to the return address of line 27. This whole thing gets replaced with a string right here and gets sent to output. So 0, 2, 3, none is our output. Cool. That concludes this memory diagram. However, I'm going to real quick draw out exactly what's going on here. So we created one node with 3. It created one node with 3. It pointed none. We then created another node, 2, and we had it point to the node with 3. Then we created another node with 1. We had that point to 2. And then finally, we created yet another node with 0, and we had that also point to 2. Cool. I hope this helped. This was kind of a lengthy one. If you have any questions or are confused about anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to office hours or tutoring. There will be a TA there that'll be absolutely thrilled to help you out. All right, cool. See you. Have a good one.